I thought that this whole thing was worse for girls than boys. And if we just look at mental health at age 14, it is. And so we'll get to the boys in a minute because there the story is addiction. But for the girls, one way to think about it is if you were a business that was, your goal was to trap girls and suck out all of their attention. If your business is dependent on just grabbing them and keeping them, strapped down to a gurney and, with their eyes open and sucking out their attention. If that was your goal, how would you trap them? What would you use as bait? And the definition of a trap is a mechanism by which when the animal's attracted, there's bait. The animal's attracted to something, and then once they grab it, they can't get out. That's what a trap is. And so for girls, the trap is social information. Girls and boys differ on average in terms of what interests them. Differences in ability are not that large. Differences of interest are very large and very consistent. Girls have a more elaborate mental map. They're more interested in who's in, who's out, who knows whose secrets, who's dating whom, who's fighting with whom. Whereas the male brain is literally shifted over a little bit towards autism. This is the work of Simon Baron-Cohen, just higher systemizing, lower empathizing. So when Instagram says, they ping you, do you want to know what so-and-so said about so-and-so, or what so-and-so said about you, or what they said, they tagged you in a photo. So this is irresistible to girls, to teenage girls. And so it uses that that's the bait. Now they go in voluntarily, you might say, but once most of them are in, then no one can leave. Because if you leave, you're cut off. They're all communicating by direct message on Instagram. So that's why it's a trap, it's a sink. It's more addictive to girls than to boys. And then what it does is it ends up, again, I was going to say not by design, but actually it appears to be by design. I have some quotes in the book. They understand girls' insecurities. They understand the way that emotion gets ahead of the frontal cortex, the self-control. And they understand insecurities. And so if you are making girls compare themselves, girls have always compared themselves to other girls. But if it was just 5 or 10 in your town or 50, it's different than if it's thousands who are almost all more beautiful than you because of careful editing and filters and all of that. And in fact, one of the most horrible and just typical things brought out by Sarah Wynne Williams, the recent book, Careless People, is that they can track exactly what's happening. And when a girl deletes multiple selfies, that's the moment they hit her with an advertisement for beauty products. Because they figured, and this has to, I assume it was done consciously, it must have been done consciously. I don't know if AI could have figured this out, but somebody figured out if they're deleting multiple selfies, they must be not satisfied with how they look. So let's give them beauty products. And so again, just playing on girls' insecurities and making them feel they have to spend their lives making themselves more beautiful, spend their money on more makeup products. 10-year-old girls are going to Sephora to buy skincare products. It's insane. It's because they're on Instagram. So in so many ways, Instagram in particular is causing harm to girls. Oh, and then there's more sexual predation of girls than there is of boys. There's the perfectionism. Girls are more subject to perfectionism, and Instagram really sort of encouraged you to be, have a perfect selfie. So each platform has a different profile of harms. Instagram is the main one to focus on for girls' mental health outcomes. Snap and TikTok have different profiles of harms.
I mean, that sounds like abuse. If somebody was to respond to a young woman doing that by then saying, well, actually, maybe you want this, that's the prompt for me to say, maybe you would like to be more beautiful, we would say that's a nasty thing to say.
It's certainly, yeah.
Bit of an asshole, actually, but it's also borderline abusive.
Well, I would say that if you are hosting children, if you have taken over the social lives of children, if you have deliberately made yourself the place that young people, that children are hanging out, I would say that you have a responsibility, you have a duty of care. And that's one of the great things that happened in the UK was you have the age-appropriate design code, the first in the world that I know of, to assert that these platforms have a duty of care that is different. You can exploit adults much more, adults we think, caveat emptor, adults can make up their own minds. You can use sharp practices on adults that are unethical, but they're not illegal. But children are a different story. We all agree about that. Left, right, and libertarian. Children are different. And these platforms don't act that way. Children are profit-centered, just as with the tobacco companies. They need to get them young, because if they don't get them young, their competitors will get them young and they'll keep them. So abuse isn't exactly the right word. I think exploitation, callousness, and just a general lack of a moral compass at these three companies. We talked about the girl story. Now let's shift to the boys' story. The boys' story, the key thing I'm finding, I didn't know this when I started the book, but the key thing is to keep your eyes on their dopamine circuits. We all talk about dopamine, this, dopamine, that. We all know dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's released when you get a little bit of pleasure, or I should say when you make a little progress towards an evolutionary goal. You get, you bite a potato chip, you master a stage in a video game. So we get a little hit of dopamine, and that doesn't satisfy us. It's not like, that felt great, I'm going to stop now. It's more like, ooh, that felt good. I want to do it again. And your daughter is soon going to be saying that over and over again, because something's exciting. She wants again. And what the story is with boys, I believe, is the number and variety of companies that are now making billions and trillions of dollars by addicting boys is revolting to me. So it begins with the video games. Now, video games are complicated. I'm not saying don't ever let kids play it, but the number of parents I've talked to is boys are lost to video games. That's all they do. They can't get them off. They have no life. They learn no skills. They get angry when they're taken off. If we're losing 5 to 10% of our boys just to video games, these are boys who are not going to be successful in life unless they can get off quickly. So it starts with the video games, moves on to porn, and that's the most painful one. When you talk to parents whose boys are lost to porn because they're so ashamed of it. But they're so a lot of boys get addicted to porn. And then there's vaping, tobacco, nicotine, Zyn. Then there's marijuana pens. You kids can, and what they're smoking is like so much more powerful. And this is just by the time they're 15. Now they can also begin to gamble. Not legal, but there are all kinds of roundabout ways that you can begin gambling. And a lot of video games have gambling-like features. Anna Lemke, one of my country's most well-known addiction researchers at Stanford, she says in her book Dopamine Nation that if you have one addiction, if you develop one addiction, you're more subject to all future addictions. Your dopamine circuits are downregulated. That means you're more in a state of withdrawal habitually. If a boy is doing dopamine-related activities for a third of his day, then the other 2/3 are painfully boring, and that includes school. So this, I think, is the boys' story. It's not social media causing boys to be depressed. We're not seeing that. What we're seeing is multiple platforms, especially video games, porn, and then plus nicotine, marijuana, plus crypto investing. And investing has been gamified. Young people, especially I think young men, need to learn how to save, invest, become a provider someday. And instead, we hand them over to gambling companies. And the more they bet, the house always wins. So the more they spend time on sports gambling platforms, the more likely they are to go bankrupt. So this is really the boys' story. If we're looking at kids at 14, it looks like the girls are doing worse because they're more depressed and anxious. But Gen Z is now turning 30. And if we look in at the 28-year-old young men and women, I think what we're seeing is that the girls are much more likely to have gone to university, graduated university, gotten a job, and be functional in the world. And the boys are substantially more likely to still be living at home playing video games.
What you're describing is us building in addiction to childhood.
Yes.
At every single level.
At every level from the age of 2 or 3, because in the U.S., 40% of our 2-year-olds have their own iPad.
I couldn't believe that when I read it.
Yeah, 2-year-olds. Yeah, because look, and you guys are no better. I don't have the iPad stats for the UK, but we do have smartphone stats for the UK, and I think it's something like, what was it? It was like, was it 25%? 25% of your 6-year-olds have their own iPhone, have their own smartphone. So in both countries, parents have discovered, I'm busy, I've got a lot to do, you're crying, here, just take the phone. Just take the phone. You're happy, I'm happy, I can do my thing. We've all discovered it's effective as a babysitter, but again, so would be morphine.